So I think we have 34 attendees in our webinar room, and it's the time to get started here with our second webinar that we're doing here at MERICS. I am Claudia Wessling, Director Publications at the Institute, and I will guide you through today's session. For data privacy reasons, I have to inform you that we will be recording this session for internal purposes. We will devote the next around 45 minutes to a topic that has made headlines during these last days, and that is the impact of the coronavirus pandemic on China's economy. Due to the months-long lockdown and the standstill of public life in China, the People's Republic's economy has suffered a historic fall. For the first time since the Cultural Revolution, China's economy has fallen into negative territory and contracted 6.8% in the first quarter in 2020. The financial toll the coronavirus is having on the economic powerhouse that China used to be will become a huge challenge to other countries as well. That said, let me introduce you to today's panelists. We have two experts from MERICS, Max Zenglein and Maximilian Kernfeld, who have just finished their work on their monitoring project, the Economic Indicators. You can find the latest issue on our website. The link will be shared with you in our chat box here in the Zoom account. They will present their latest findings and help us understand what lies ahead for China and how that will affect the global economy in the months to come. And I am also very happy to say that we have convinced Dr. Alicia Garcia Herrero, based in Hong Kong, to join us here today. For her, it's already 7 p.m. in the evening, so the more grateful I am that you're joining us, Alicia. She's a senior research associate at Bruegel think tank, chief economist for the Asia Pacific at Natixi Bank, and a member of the MERICS Advisory Board. Alicia will shortly comment on the findings of Max and Maximilian and will also give her own assessment, of course. So now, without further ado, I would like to hand it over to Max Zenglein and ask him to present his take. Max, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and also a warm welcome from my side. I just want to jump in right into giving the impact of the coronavirus on the real economy. And as Claudia has already pointed out, this is really China's first post-reform economic crisis. And of course, there were some other crises before, most notably SARS, since it was also a virus outbreak, but most notably the global financial crisis. And I think a big difference is even during the deepest phase of the global financial crisis, China's GDP still expanded by 6.4%. So it also came from a much higher level of growth. So this was still a period of double-digit growth. Whereas when the COVID-19 virus broke out, China's economy was already struggling into lower levels of growth. And it really came to a massive contraction. And I'd like to point out how unprecedented really this slowdown was. And if we look here again to the global financial crisis, even at its peak on a quarter-by-quarter basis, the economy slowed by 2.4 percentage points. So it was a much more gradual slowdown in the impact of the financial crisis was much slower to be felt throughout the economy. Whereas if you look at COVID-19 outbreak, you have this 12.8 drop in GDP growth, which is just massive in scale. And I think this is always important to keep in mind where we're coming from. This is really unprecedented. And I think also from an analytical point of view and looking at the economy, we're really at a different planet here and looking at this situation at the moment. Of course, the economy has been impacted all across the board. So it's been a massive hit that affected all parts of the economy. Of course, there are some items that stuck out. So you have IT and financial intermediation that actually grew during this period. But if you benchmark also other sectors in relation to overall GDP, there's been a really massive hit. And even services, which have been important for growth, have fallen into deep negative territory. Obviously, also because retail and restaurant business, for example, contracted massively. Here again, accommodation and so hotels and restaurant business over 40% or near 40%. But the March data, so we're looking about, this was before Q1 data. If we look at the March data, there was some hope for recovering as the Chinese economy began to open up, and you see some of the indicators here, picking up speed, investment, production, retail or exports, all alike. So this has triggered this hope of this V-shaped recovery. But looking into this, retail is one of the weakest indicators, so it's still staying flat around 19.5%. Production was one of the best, and this really caught my attention, and I'd like to explore this and what this means also for this V-shaped recovery. So on a year-on-year basis, the manufacturing only contracted 1.1, so coming from minus 13.5, that's really quite remarkable. And it's even more remarkable if you look on the reference period so the March of 2019, which was the highest growth rate since 2014. So even the base effect, it's coming in comparison to a really strong month. So this makes this minus 0.1 even more remarkable. Now, looking at the different sectors in manufacturing, trying to understand where this growth comes from, we see quite an improvement compared to the February figures in March. So March figures here being the yellow figures, and some do stick out. Some of them are SOE dominated industries. So you have steel sector, chemical, as well as transport equipment. So that's railway, for example, that really jumped from deep negative territory back into positive growth rate. But the really interesting story is the electronics sector, which is also in the importance of the overall economy is quite substantial. It grew by 9.9% in March. And if you look at the details here, it correlates also with an increased demand for imports for semiconductors going into the electronics business. But I really think this rebound was basically in the first half of March, when there was the world was hoping that China will again start production, and we're waiting for their for electronic components and the like to be shipped out again. But the shutdown in Europe, which began in the second half of March, then obviously the interest in getting these goods from China also has dried up. So I really think this is one of the very important drivers here that have contributed to this rapid uptick in the electronic sector. And adding giving it another angle and trying to illustrate where we're really at here is, if you look at, I'm using the textile industry as a proxy here also for SMEs. So you have, if you look at the industrial value added, so the supply chain, it's fairly easy to ramp up production again, but you still need people to buy stuff. So we have here both exports struggling, retail struggling. So, I mean, disposable income contracted by 3.9%. People are focusing on buying essentials, and the global impact of the crisis is just yet going to show up over the next few months. So, and speaking of SMEs, they're going to be struggling. They're going to be struggling, staying alive. So I think there's immediate risk of increased bankruptcies and further defaults coming along. And I would like to hand it over to Max for some insights on the monetary side and market reactions.
Thank you, Max. The central bank has, could you go back one slide, please? One more. Thank you. The central bank has reacted to the economic pressure with every monetary policy tool at its disposal. What we're looking at here is the reserve requirements for large and small banks, which have both been lowered since the beginning of the crisis. China was already undergoing a gradual process towards lower reserve requirements, but this has now sped up since the beginning of this crisis. As you just mentioned SMEs, and some of these reserve requirements are contingent on lending more to SMEs, which banks have typically been somewhat unwilling to do. Could you go to the next slide, please? Thank you. The central bank has also reduced the interest rate on its main monetary policy operation, the reverse repurchase. Both the 7-day and the 14-day window has been reduced, as you can see here, several times since the beginning of the year. Next, please. And perhaps the most striking is with regards to monetary injections. So In all of what I've done here in this chart is I've aggregated 7 and 14-day turnover of reverse repurchase agreements on a monthly basis. In all of 2019, the central bank injected 6.7 trillion renminbi into the market. Since the beginning of this year, they've almost injected 4 trillion already, which is about a 1.5% increase in aggregate financing just through these injections. Next, please. The result of these easing measures I just described has been for interest rates to fall since the beginning of the year. As you see here, in 2019, we have relatively stable interest rates, which then begin crawling downwards at the beginning of this year, partly as a response to these, both to lower growth prospects and also a response to the changing liquidity environment. Next, please. As a result of the economic deterioration and the loose monetary policy, we see a deterioration of the Chinese financial situation. Nominal GDP in this quarter grew at contracted by 5.3%, while aggregate financing grew by 11.5%. So this means that the credit to GDP ratio will be expanding. And now this doesn't always have to be a bad thing, but we have very strong reason to believe that the underlying cash flows, which are supposed to service this debt and repay interest, is deteriorating. SMEs are particularly hard hurt, and households may also be hurt in the future. Refinancing the financial system may become a necessity in the future. This will of course be inflationary, but there is some room to do this, as if you take out food and fuel from inflation, we see a rather deflationary environment, which means that there is some room to let inflation crawl up to support the economy. But of course, this will eventually have to be carried by the livelihoods of regular people. Next, please. So the markets have generally responded negatively to the crisis, but the Chinese stock market has performed better than global indices. What you see in this chart is all 4 different global indices: the Shanghai Composite, the Nikkei, S&P 500, and DAX, which have all been normalized to 100 at the beginning of the year. So you can see that the international indices have contracted by about 15 to 25%, whilst the Shanghai Composite only fell by 10%. This is likely for several reasons. First of all, China maintains strict capital controls, so it's difficult for Chinese investors to move their money abroad. Secondly, the stimulus measures have been somewhat effective. And third, there is some indication that foreign investors have seen China as a safe haven during this crisis. This can be seen somewhat through data from the Hong Kong Stock Connect, which has been used very much since the beginning of the year. Next, please. We've seen some currency depreciation, not too much though. At the beginning of the year, the CNY traded at 6.95 against the dollar and has now fallen down to about 7.08. But we need to remember that China maintains has a managed floating exchange rate, and they have intervened with foreign currency reserves, which have fallen slightly. And as I mentioned before, capital controls are in place. Still, we do see a little bit of pressure on the currency. Next, real estate. We do see a fall in real estate, but it seems to be in line with the previous downwards trend. So what we don't see is a change in the change. Real estate prices were trending down across 70 cities. In the big cities like Shanghai, Shenzhen, they're still going upwards, but overall in the country trending downwards. This gives the Chinese government some stability, as the real estate market contains a vast amounts of savings and wealth that could be eradicated if there was a fire sale. And with that, I'll hand it back to Max.
Thank you, and I'd just like to wrap this up and especially address the situation we're in here. So I was trying to address how massive this slowdown has been, and somehow I think there's a lot of hope that the Chinese economy is going to quickly recover, and this could also maybe be a good example for other countries, and in general, if the second largest economy in the world picks up speed, that should be make the crisis that we're facing less severe. But somehow it reminds me of kind of we're in a situation where you have a group of cars heading down the highway at 100 miles an hour and coming to a sudden stop and colliding, and then we think everybody's just going to get into the car and speed on as if nothing happened. We're just going to experience the impact of this dramatic slowdown of the economy. And I think in China, it's quite obvious that you have this weak domestic demand. You have people are insecure about their employment, about their income. You have highly indebted households who are leveraged with their mortgages and the like. And you have this massive global economic recession coming in where also demand is going to slow down. So again, as I said, it's very easy to revamp up supply and production, but if no one's going to buy that, that's also going to have further ripple effects, aside from the potential financial risks. And just maybe some outlook for the second quarter. And again, the State Council has announced these 6 insurers where my read is here, they're trying to safeguard and react to the immediate impacts that are still going to, or the economy is still going to face. So I really think Q2 is not going to be all too optimistic. Growth is going to stay negative. For now, the Chinese government is still going to try to have these rather targeted stimulus measures, again, trying to address the immediate economic impacts, trying to reduce bankruptcies, for example, providing SMEs with cash or access to capital. But that might change. And the scope of the stimulus might expand. So I think that's really an open question on what the reaction will be. And I really think that in the next few weeks, the growth target of around 6% will have to be dropped. Otherwise, I would see this as a quite worrying sign if they're trying to, in any way, trying to defend this growth target. And I'll leave it at that and hand over to Claudia.
Thank you, Max and Maximilian. That was quite a grim situation that you presented here, and a lot of numbers which I hope our audience here could digest in this brief time given. As a brief information for everyone, we have 46 participants in the room right here, people registered from the public sector, from business, other think tanks, so that you know who you are in a room with, although you can't see anyone. Well, let's move on and welcome Alicia Garcia Herrero for her brief comment. Alicia has brought a few slides on her own, and I would ask her to share her screen with us now. I will unmute you, sorry.
Yes, okay.
Here you go.
Hear me now. Yeah,
yes.
So first of all, thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be part of this seminar. I've learned a lot. I follow the Chinese economy, but I'm always amazed at how much, oh, sorry, the light went off, but I hope you can see me. I'm amazed at how much, you know, detail and really great command of what's happening in China on the economic front, which makes my life very difficult because I basically agree with the crux of the message, which is that China's economy is indeed going through what I call basically a vanishing demand moment, if I may summarize what we've heard. It's great to have all of these numbers that the supply is coming back, that production is back to 90 plus, and we get these numbers every day. But the more they produce, if they can't sell to either the rest of the world or their own citizens, the bigger the problem might become. Because China's problem for a long time has been overcapacity. And in a way, we're back to where we were because of the coronavirus. I think that's my key message, and it was very well reflected in the presentation. So basically, my slides are only going to focus on that. The plummeting retail sales. It's not about the GDP number we saw, which was quite dramatic, minus 6.8%, but it's about plummeting retail sales. And most importantly, not because people are saving, which probably they are, it's because people are not earning, which is a big difference. China's disposable income has been growing at the tune of 10% for years, then back last year, 5.5, you know, pretty decent growth of disposable income. It's over. No more growth of disposable income. It's actually negative. So that's a big, wake-up call for China, in my opinion, because the whole model was based on, we all know it, moving away from investment-led growth to consumption-led growth, but you need to have the income to do that, either from the rest of the world, and there we're all sure it's vanishing given what's happening, but also domestically. So that's really the key message. Now, within the collapse in demand, where is it most aggressive? And I want to say this because it's quite relevant for Germany as an exporter. It's, of course, consumer durables. That's where, you know, the shock is. And what is the most obvious consumer durable in China? 1/4 of basically retail sales, auto sales. That's what's plummeting, especially in March. So now this supply coming back and demand not showing up, rightly so, and I fully agree with the presentation, points to deflationary pressures. We may feel relieved that they're not there because the consumer price index was so high, everybody was worrying about pork and other matters in 2019. Now we could even laugh about it because that high level of CPI actually is, if I may say, a buffer for what's coming. And you can already see it, it's coming down very rapidly. But if you really want to see the deflationary pressures, it's not about consumer price index you need to check. It's about producer price index, where you see very clearly that intermediate goods, capital goods, those prices are collapsing. Because why buy more intermediate goods if you can't sell? So of course, now the key for the world is, will China, at the worst of all times, by the way, for us, because we also have deflationary pressures in our economy, export inflation? That's a key question we all need to focus on. I'll end up by talking for 1 minute about the stimulus. So I fully agree with this idea of so far targeted stimulus. Now, going a little bit further, what kind of targeted stimulus? Yes, maybe on the one hand, monetary transmission mechanism not really working. That's the problem of SMEs we've been hearing. The other issue is private investment is not there. Infrastructure investment is actually also not there. So of course, I think they will go back to the old fashioned, and they are doing that through the big issuance of local government bonds for infrastructure expenditure, mainly shanty towns. But that's not the right thing to do, sorry to say. China needs a consumption-based, consumption-focused stimulus package. They need to put money in people's pockets to consume. Otherwise, those deflationary pressures will be massive. Unemployment is already giving us a hint of what's happening. More so, and I don't have the data to show you, but if you look at actually migrant unemployment, we're talking about 40 million in the last survey. So, you know, there's people out there losing their jobs that you may not necessarily see in the official statistics. So yes, it's a problem of income. It's not only a problem of not being willing to consume. Finally, on the exchange rate, because you know many of you might be exporters into China or competing with China in third markets. We've not seen the renminbi being used so much yet. Yes, thanks to the recent weakness of the dollar. Because if you see what's happening with that CFETs that I'm showing to you, which is a basket of currencies showing the competitiveness of the renminbi has benefited from others basically appreciating against the dollar recently. If it hadn't been because the dollar has weakened, my call would have been renminbi would go meaning more depreciation, because they just can't hold it. They need to create a demand desperately, whether externally or anywhere else. It's just not even the question. So watch out for that. If China can't stimulate the economy as needed, this might be one way to do it. So we all have to watch out, because that in itself would feed into this deflationary, you know, think about the Great Depression, people, devaluing just to get their way out, this bigger than neighbor policy. So I'm not saying it will happen, but I want just to, basically tell you that this could be one more instrument if needed. And I leave it there. Thank you very much, Claudia.